The minutes are ready for your review and approval.
Can you give us the nature of the revision to those minutes, please?
Yes, that's actually on page 4. It was regarding comments made on the Murrieta Valley appeal.
Okay.
It was clarifying language on the board member's comment.
Okay. I know Mr. Duffy's going to have, just 1 minute, Tom. I know Mr. Duffy's going to, good afternoon, Senator. I know Mr. Duffy will have some comments. Is there any other issues on the minutes that have been identified? No. Seeing none. Tom, would you like to address the minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Tom Duffy for cash. If it wouldn't be terribly inconvenient for you, I would just ask you to hold on adopting these. There are a number of places in the minutes where it identifies board member making a comment, but it doesn't identify which board member. And there were a couple of other issues that we had. I'd be pleased to work with Mr. Morales and share with him what it is that we have found.
Okay, so we have a request to put the minutes over. Is there any objection to that by any of the board members? Seeing none, such will be the order.
Thank you.
And I do want to ask a question, Mr. Morales. Now, we are planning on having our transcripts posted on the OPSC website. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're working on that. We hope to have it for the next board meeting. We'll start having them online.
So those are public documents that we have been on an as-requested basis sending the transcripts out, but we're going to try to be more ecologically sensitive and make them available electronically. Now, those transcripts will identify who's speaking and so on and so forth, right? So hopefully this will be less of an issue going forward. Okay, very good. Executive Officer statement, please.
Good afternoon. A couple items that we wanted to highlight today. One of important note is seismic funding. Today we'll be presenting in the board's agenda the first seismic funding request for San Ramon Valley. And it's, the request is to replace the gym facility at the San Ramon Valley High School. That gym facility qualifies as the most vulnerable category type 2 building. And so with that, we are presenting a board's recommendation for unfunded approval. On another... And probably Margie needs to stand up.
We're on the executive officer report.
Okay.
I'll let the record show that Mr. Harvey had a triple espresso before he came in today.
And another item we wanted to note is the redesignation of funding for projects with the labor compliance program. At the February and March State Allocation Board meeting, staff was requested to identify projects awaiting for funding that had a labor compliance component. And with that, we bring forward to you today in a status of funds 30 new construction projects that's approximately worth value of $118 million that will be redesignated from Proposition 1D to Proposition 47. And with that, that would be reflected in the status of funds. The next item we would like to highlight is our high-performance outreach. At the May board, we were requested to provide increased outreach for the high-performance funding. With that, staff did meet with Senator Hancock's office, the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and Collaborative for High-Performance Schools, to increase and encourage districts to apply for the funding. And with that said, the nature of the discussion was whether or not they have received high-performance grants and trying to incorporate high-performance design into the construction. Also, the other issue they raised was the green design construction elements that actually have little or no additional cost. And the information material that is already available through CHIPS, which we can inform districts and provide them a little bit more guidance with providing an easy-to-understand letter in terms of how they can adopt these practical guidelines into the design. And with that said, we have a follow-up meeting scheduled for next week. And obviously, currently, we still have $88 million available in funding.
Okay.
And the next item we would like to highlight is the Charter School Facilities Program. As a result of the last board's action, we have a new filing round. And so the new filing round opens July 1st. And again, we're going to have some outreach to help charter schools to practically help them assist with the filling out of the forms. This will be a collaborative effort with Office of Public School Construction, the School Facilities Finance Authority, and California Department of Education. And again, these workshops begin on Friday in Los Angeles, and we have another workshop scheduled in San Diego on Monday. There would be a follow-up workshop in Sacramento in which we intend to webcast that, so folks who don't have the abilities to can travel due to budget restrictions will have the ability to have access to that workshop. With that, I conclude the Executive Officer statement.
Just one follow-up question, Lisa. When you had your meeting on the high-performance outreach and it was made known that there was still $88 million available, did you get any sense that there would be some additional applications for funding coming forward?
I think there were going to be more discussions on how to provide an easy flow, a process, maybe reevaluating the CHIPS criteria, perhaps providing more of an informational letter that would help school district to encourage them to incentivize that they have access to these funds. So I know it's just an early discussion, and that was the first kickoff meeting, so I imagine they're going to do some more outreach and more collaborative work groups.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey?
As a follow-on question, we took the time to learn what obstacles there might be to access the Seismic funding. We're beginning to address those. As you've talked with folk on the high performance, are they mentioning obstacles, not to the process itself, but to perhaps costs involved in building those more environmentally friendly schools? I mean, I think we need to find a way of making it happen because you gather those costs back rather quickly. But have you heard anything that would be a red flag relative to we're not really accessing it because?
Right. I'm going to have to defer to Juan. Do you want to answer the question? I'll defer to Juan Morales because unfortunately I wasn't in the meeting, so.
There have been some concerns that perhaps the grants aren't enough to do certain changes to the design of the projects. Actually, Mr. Savage here can probably explain this better, but that's part of the concerns that we've heard, and it's something that we are looking into in terms of exploring possible future regulation changes.
So it would take a regulation change to effectuate that issue? We couldn't do it administratively or interpreting our regulations differently?
Significant changes would require regulation
All right,
changes.
thank you.
Mr. Savage?
Thank you. Bill Savage, West Contra Costa Unified School District, Cash Chair. Cash is very concerned about the High Performance Schools grant, and it's the fact that the funds are going out so slowly. And we see some structural impediments, and we are, under the leadership of Steve Newsom, our chair of our High Performance Committee, convening a working group to look at the title of the working group is Why the High Performance Money is Not Going Out. And what we see are some fundamental issues, and we'd love to partner with the state, with OPSC and DSA to look at this. I can share with you, we just submitted 3 schools for the High Performance Schools program. The cost to pay for the consultants to perform the work and the calculations required is more than the grant increase that is given to us. And that doesn't even include the hard costs to build the high performance elements into your school. And so I think we have to take a look at the way the program is structured, the requirements for reporting and documentation, et cetera. So we're convening a work group to do that, and we would look to work with OPSC and DSA on that. Thank you.
Mr. Savage, how about something that says under penalty of perjury, you certify that everything is up to LEED standards?
Well, I don't think, we don't have any issue with perjury.
I'm just trying to expedite the process. Some inside joking on here. Senator Hancock.
Yeah, I just wondered when you said that, did you mean the consultant who comes and certifies that CHIP standards have been met, or the consultants that would come in and help design low-flow toilets or non-toxic drugs or whatever?
Let me give you an example. Under CHIPS and under the High Performance Grant Program set up for DSA, we have to provide acoustical engineering certification that the classroom building meets the 40 dBA standard and the reverb time. And that's to get 1 point. To hire an acoustical engineer for an elementary school will cost you in the Bay Area $15,000 to $23,000. Okay, to do the analysis, prepare the documentation. The architects all are asking for more money, and rightfully so. This is additional work. I'd be happy to share the submittals that we prepare from the engineering consultants that go in. So we have to look at this and see how it's set up and look at how we can get better bang for our buck, because there's a lot of extra work involved just getting to the point of construction, not even considering the added construction cost when we go forward.
Question. Yes, Mr. Savage, is that due to the regulations for the program, or is that due to securing the CHIPS designation?
Well, the program regulations and the CHIPS designation are fairly comparable. The state's program is not specifically based on one LEED or CHIPS standard per se, because the state can't have a proprietary system. But the standards that are used in the High Performance Schools Grant Program for DSA are comparable to the CHIPS standards in acoustical engineering areas and very comparable to the LEED standards in the same area.
So, for instance, if you were outside of this program and you were looking for a CHIPS CHIPS standard designation, you would have to do that submittal as well?
That's correct. And I think, to be fair, our district and many districts in the Bay Area, all over the state, our school boards want us to build sustainable schools with green schools, and we want to be there. We're really doing this for political reasons, in a sense, and because it's the right thing to do for the state. But the dollars there are really not, they're just not really playing into making it worthwhile from a monetary standpoint.
Mr. Sheehy?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you. I would really appreciate it if you guys would, if Cash would look at this and bring a report to this board. Because honestly, Mr. Savage, I remember talking to you a number of years ago and saying, I hope you're building these schools green. And you said, oh, yes, they're all green. Now, so take the acoustics. When you're designing a building, don't we know roughly what acoustic excellence would look like? So we'd hire an architect that could do that for us. I'm looking at things like non-toxic paints or carpets or windows that open. Some of those things that would seem to me ought to be absorbable in just the way an architect would work. That's why I appreciate Ms. Moore's question, because it's hard for me to see
Many of
where
them
it's
are,
coming
for
from.
sure. But I should have brought my documentation packages that were submitted to the state, and you'd get a sense of the amount of documentation that's required, and documentation it basically equates to additional hours of professionals preparing this work that they charge the school districts. And so we are doing it. We are building green schools. There's plenty of things that we can do to put daylighting in, to do windows that open, to put low-flush toilets that don't add significant costs. But there are a lot of issues related to documentation and to areas of specialized engineering that we are incurring many, many costs on. And I don't think anybody, when we set the program up, is really anticipating how this would be structured.
And so is the problem in the oversight that we're requesting too much paperwork for you to document what you're doing anyway, and therefore the additional monies doesn't cover it?
There's a number of issues. That's one of them. One of them is also the level of the initial grant, and the way the program is set up is a percentage increase in grant may not be providing an appropriate funding level to support where we're going. So these are kind of some of the things we'd like to do in our working group and bring back to you.
Absolutely. Do you have a sense of when the working group might be ready? Because I think we should schedule time then and have a report and have a discussion.
Well, we just got it off the ground at our cash board meeting today, so let me get back to you and we'll get you a schedule. We can work with the chair.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Assemblywoman Brownlee.
I just wanted to follow up on that, and then I think that I'm really happy that we're looking at it. It seems as though it's time to really review these regulations for a school district to have to. It seems quite onerous that what school districts have to adhere to, albeit, we want our schools to be green, we want them to be sustainable, but they're only getting a 10%, extra grant money, which in the long run, the adherence to what needs to be done might actually cost more than what the grant is. And so I think trying to find where that balance is really important. I mean, we don't want to preclude our schools from going green, and perhaps if they go 90% of the way, that's better than going 0% of the way. So I'm just glad that it's going to come back and that we can have a full discussion on it.
Could I make another comment?
Can we let Mr. Harvey go first?
Oh, we could.
And then we'll come back to you, Senator.
We could. I didn't know.
Oh, I think I know protocol. Senator, please.
Senator?
No, Mr. Harvey, after you.
Well, this discussion is confirming my worst fears, frankly, and I think we're right on relative to bringing back regulations which will really simplify what we expect out of the CHIPS equivalent schools. And, you know, we can ask all we can that districts go as green as they can under the modernization or new construction and not expect all of this rigor and analysis. I mean, that is a way to go. The incentive ostensibly is this 10% kick if you're trying to get this CHIPS certification. So it seems to me it's a combination of changing our regulations dramatically and looking at maybe encouraging folk to go that 90% and not worry about the certification, but do the right thing as it relates to energy efficiency and being green. Senator Hancock.
I could not have put it better myself. I was, you know, that was essentially what I was going to say. And I was just going to share a little thing that some of you know I used to work for the U.S. Department of Education. And I remember when we had something called Goals 2000, and it gave grant money to states. And we were trying to pare back the regulations, and so we had a 10-page application for many millions of dollars that came to the state of California. And 6 months or so later, I asked the school superintendent if they had applied for the money, and he said, no, there's a 60-page application from the state. We don't have the administrative staff to do it. And I did check with the department, and they laughed and said, you should have seen what was suggested. So it's like sometimes bureaucracy generates reports.
That was the U.S. Department of Ed, right?
No, it was the state, Kathleen. The feds sent a 10-pager, and somehow it got out to the schools as a 60-pager. But anyway, anything that we can do to cut back on that so that we get the goal and we make every dollar go to the maximum amount, I think will be wonderful. Thanks.
One last point on that is some school districts have already passed resolutions that say we're going to build to CHIPS standards. And so if they didn't come into the state at all, they've said that whatever that means, they're doing. So it's interesting. I'm wondering if there's some way that we can say the same thing without the documentation, because a district that may not come in for state funding is saying we're going to build green, and they build green. And perhaps part of our problem is that we say build green, but also certify that you built green. And it's that certification that may be dissuasive. So if we can somewhere get to where we have the ability to put less on, I think we'll see more people participate.
I think that's a great idea, and I know some very big districts like L.A. have adopted these standards, and so we'll find out some interesting things, I'm sure.
Any additional questions or comments by board members? Seeing none, Juan, the consent calendar.
The consent calendar is ready for your review and approval.
We have a motion to move the consent calendar. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Do the board members have any requests regarding the consent calendar? Senator Weiland.
Just a question. Is the consent agenda everything that follows under 4?
It's pages 14 through pages 115.
So it includes the various eligibility approvals, approvals that are not funded, all those items.
That's correct.
Correct. Juan, do you want to give a fuller description of what's included?
It includes all of our new construction, modernization, eligibility, determinations, adjustments, including unfunded approvals for new construction, modernization, those types of projects.
Okay, I'd just like to make a comment before we take that vote. Arguably, one of the most important things we do is, and it's pretty clear what we do, is ratify the work that staff, SAB staff has done regarding eligibility. If there's an issue on the part of the school district, they come before us, and we have seen some of these. I would just like to put a couple of issues out on the table that we won't deal with this time, but I think are important. One is the adequacy of career technical education programming in these funds, in the schools we're funding. Now, currently, there is a regulation, which I'm pleased to have been part of, that SDE approves when there's an application for funding. They approve, even though those facilities, as in the modernization, for example, may not include career technical education, that they approve a plan and answer some questions. And we've asked SAB staff to get us that, and I think really the place to get it is the Department of Education, so that we have a sense of the adequacy of that, because these are state funds that we are allocating, and many, if not most of us on this body, at least from the legislature, have a big interest in that. And the other thing I just threw out there that might be for future consideration, since it's taxpayer money that's funding a significant portion of this, I'm very interested in what costs are and how they vary from application to application and district to district. In other words, I know, and I'll just give you some personal experience from having been in the building material business and having supplied materials for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 schools, the variation in expense for the same school and the same facility, and arguably with the same utility and the same life, is sometimes extraordinary. And I don't have a problem if a district decides that we're a wealthy district and we want to build a really nice, iconic school. And if you've ever been on a school board and you go to their meetings, you will see the table where the architects are there and they show you their award-winning designs. But we then, if they've made that decision, are committing taxpayer funds for the other half of that. And I'm not sure at some future point we might not want to have a discussion about the extent to which we commit taxpayer funds. For example, there may be a district which is able to spend that kind of money, and that would typically be a wealthier district. And in that sense, we are committing on a per square foot basis perhaps quite a bit more taxpayer money than we might to another district. And I just throw that out there as something that we might want to consider, because I bet the variability is pretty big. So I'll just let it go at that and just make those comments.
I have Ms. Moore, Assemblywoman Brownlee, but I'm first going to ask Mr. Morales a question. Juan, aren't our grants based upon, aren't they formulaic? And so,
yes.
And so, if the school district chooses to build additional features that might be considered optional by some other district, they're not necessarily committing a higher level of state dollars, are they? Because the dollars they get are based upon the eligibility as calculated under the school facilities program. Is that's my understanding? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Does that mean, though, that the square foot or some similar allocation is precisely, I doubt it means that it's precisely the same. It's a formula based on the type of facilities and that sort of thing, right?
No, it's strictly a per pupil grant amount. And actually, in fact, Senator, this part of the discussion that we're going to have later on in tab 15 that deals with the actual cost of school projects on a per square foot basis.
Okay, and then you'll talk about the formula, how you're making that decision now.
Yeah, it's important to note the distinction. The one thing is to note that the per pupil grant amounts are formula driven, and they are based on per pupils, which generally mean the number of classrooms in a project. But the other part that we're going to talk about later talks about the actual amount that it costs to build certain projects, which may get to your question as far as the number of the amount of per square foot.
Yeah, and there obviously is some variability
Yes.
in certain places. But so that is something we will discuss, and I think it's important to discuss.
Yes.
All right, good. Thanks
more.
Senator Weiland, I just wanted to make sure on the career technical education, there is a law that indicates that we do a report on the part of career technical education that is a part of a project, and I can have Mr. Yeager speak to that if you'd like right now, or is it that you would like the information from the Department of Education on what's occurring there? And that's separate from, that we placed the amount of money for actual career technical education facilities separately as well. So there's two career technical education components occurring right now in this program.
Right, you're talking about the money with the special bond money specifically for CTE.
Right, that we're going to go out for the third round on.
Right.
There's that component. And then as districts come in, and I don't know the specifics, and if we need that, Fred can talk to that, but as districts come in, they do report what they're doing around career technical education in each application.
I think that's the part that and I don't know if others may be interested in, probably at the point at which the department considers or makes the approval, depending on the answers to those questions, even though it may be quite a bit later that it winds up here. That's something I'd like to see, because
We'd certainly be happy to share that with you.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Ms. Brownlee.
I would think that would be a very good discussion, the points that you've raised. And on the issue of adequacy on CTE, I absolutely agree that we need to sort of shine a special light on that, because we are hoping that CTE, the classroom of CTE, if you will, is going through a major transformation. We're hoping for that outcome. And so I do think that we need to give a special look at that to see how we're progressing and how we're doing. On the other hand, I don't want to lose sight of tracking or making sure that we have, for example, the appropriate science laboratories in schools, or smart boards in classrooms that might really enhance better teaching and instruction, and I don't want to lose sight of those things, because I think sometimes the pendulum can swing out so much that we sort of lose sight of some of the others. So I just wanted to kind of add that as part of, but I think it's a very important discussion to have.
I think you're absolutely correct in that, Assemblywoman, and I feel the same way. It's because a particular say a modernization project may not include appropriately any CTE, but might be a renovation of science labs, for example. So about which I'm equally interested. I just think it's one way of, since that's been shorted, of trying to see that the applicant is thinking about that and has a plan. But I agree with you completely.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there additional questions or comments by board members on the consent calendar? Anybody from the general public want to weigh in on the consent calendar? Seeing no one, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent calendar is approved. Ms. Silverman, could you please present to us the status of fund release report?
Yes. As a result of the last month's board, we thought we'd provide more transparency on the fund disbursements as a result of the March and April bond sale. So to encapsulate, we received $548 million in the March sale, and to date we have provided 99% of those funds to school districts. And the $4.3 million balance you see there is funds that have already been set aside for career tech education projects and one charter school project. So in essence, those funds have already been committed to. On the next item is to highlight the April sale. We received $1.4 billion in bonds proceeds. To that extent, we have released $761 million in funds, which represents 53% of the proceeds. So we're actually making a lot of progress here. And what we wanted to highlight in the lower chart is, and I know we've heard some feedback, and we're definitely going to come back and fine-tune this a little bit more.
Excuse me, Lisa, I want to make sure we're all following you. You're still on page 116, and now
correct.
you're working on the chart at the bottom. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Correct. So what we wanted to highlight is, out of that April sale, we still have $329 million that could be released for active projects that have an active apportionment. And we wanted to do a comparison of the apportioned projects to reflect that we still have $739 million of those projects on our workload, but we don't have active fund releases. So with that, again, once we receive fund releases for these projects, we can actively move those funds over for disbursement. So I'll open the floor up to questions.
Questions of Ms. Silverman on the status of fund release? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Brownlee. We'll get there.
Chair.
We will get there.
Yes. I just had one question, and that is, I know at the last meeting that we had here, Laura Chick was here, and we had the opportunity to meet her, and I think she was introduced as part of her function is to oversee some of the stimulus money as it relates to what we are doing here. And I notice on this particular item, it talks about the Build America bonds, which are part of the stimulus package. But indeed, when you look at the chart below it, it's actually all California state money. And so I'm trying to understand if we are receiving Build America bonds, how that, and if we are or we are not, and how that intertwines into the buckets of money that we have. And so if I could get somebody to answer that for me. I don't understand, because it references funds for Build America funds, but then the chart down below has all California funding sources.
Well, I know the March sale that was for specific Proposition 1D. And so when the Treasurer's Office was assessing the bond market, at that time, ARA and the new incentive programs to sell these bonds, yes, they are general obligation bonds, but I understand it was a marketing aspect of trying to sell these bonds. So in essence, they did sell it under the guise of Build America bond proceeds. And so with that, it is an incentive for the state. They receive a reduced interest cost on that issuance. So that was the explanation.
And can you, so then what this chart is demonstrating is that we use the marketing tool of Build America bonds, and these bonds, even though they're state bonds, we got them at a reduced interest rate?
Interest cost issuance, correct.
Ms. Brownlee, may I, for the benefit of your question and the committee members in the audience, would it be okay if I elaborate on that a little bit? Now, I may not get this exactly right, but I think that the March sales were sales of the Prop 47 and Prop 1D bonds. Is that right, Lisa?
No, March sale was exclusively 1D.
Exclusively 1D, okay.
Right.
So what happened is in April, they used the Build America bonds, and one of the factors that added to Treasurer Lockyer's success in that sale, recall we thought he was only going to be able to sell several $1 billion in April, and he did $7 billion, is that the Build America bonds have a much larger potential market than the tax-exempt bonds. Tax-exempt bonds are not bonds that big pension funds would buy, for example, PERS or STRS or other, the Texas Teachers Retirement System, other pension funds. because pension funds don't have a tax liability. So therefore, pension funds and those types of institutional investors are looking at yield. And so they're typically not interested in the tax-exempt bonds, which makes our market for selling school bonds smaller. With the Build America bonds, they were marketed and they trade and sell and price at like taxable bonds. But what happens is that, and so taxable bonds have a higher interest rate, so they're more attractive. But the benefit that we get through the federal program is the federal government actually rebates back to the state of California a certain amount of the interest money that we have to pay. So, so the result of that is because they have the higher interest rate for the investors, the Build America bonds reach a much broader array of institutional investors that we might otherwise be able to do, and we were very successful. So you're right. They are, in fact, state general obligation bonds, and they are rated based upon California's ability to repay them. But the program under which they were sold and the additional benefit the state gets is, in fact, some federal ARA funds to lower our net interest cost, and hopefully that's helpful. That's about the extent of my knowledge. I'm not sure I can go any further than that.
And then Laura was here, and as I said at the last meeting, I thought that the governor made a really wonderful appointment. I think Laura's perfect for sort of overseeing how the state is doing with regards to stimulus money. So I guess I'm trying to understand what what her role might be here, because it's more state dollars than it is stimulus money. Is that correct? Or
perhaps we could have Ms. Chick participate. Maybe we should have her come into our next board meeting and we could address those questions directly to her. I'm
not sure if I have any more questions beyond that, but I was just trying to understand.
Well, I don't know that I have the comprehensive answer to this, but I think that her interest in what we're doing is, in fact, because we use the Build America bonds as a way to sell, and that therefore we are getting direct rebates from the federal government, which is part of the ARA money that was appropriated. So I think that's what it is. I think it's as simple as that, but we can certainly arrange to have her.
Right. We could definitely try to arrange that.
Come back in and address this body if there's an interest in doing that. Senator Weiland, then Kathleen Moore.
I share that same interest because when I'm looking at the page 116, what I see is state money. And so maybe that could be explained. I see 1D at the top, and I assume that was from the March sale.
Correct.
And that the proceeds released to us were the $548 million, and those were projects, well, whatever stage they're in, we released that money.
Correct.
We've done that. And then in the second part, the Build America bonds, I'm confused because I see in the little schedule there, it lists again 1D and then 55 and 47. Are those Build America bonds, the others? I'm confused.
Well, we have projects on our active list, and unfortunately, when we had the March proceeds come available, the distinction was they had 1D character. I mean, so we had to provide them a list in which we can fund projects that actually had a 1D apportionment. But obviously, the treasurer's offices and, the agencies recognize that there's more than just 1D need. So, in essence, we provided them a certification of active apportioned projects that had fund releases. So they wanted to provide ability to provide funds to those other projects in the other propositions. So that's why there's a distinction. They only gave us a certain pot of money to fund certain pot of apportionments for those particular bond source. So that's why we have the distinction, because we can't go beyond that line of proceeds.
So what does it mean in the second little chart there where it has 1D and it's $587 million, and that's different from the first chart, and then below that it's got 55 and 47.
Right.
Those are.
Ms. Silverman, may I address Senator Weiland's question?
I'm just confused.
So the Build America bonds is a program under ARA, but in order for any state to take advantage of it, well, let's strike that comment. In order for California to take advantage of it, and to issue general obligation bonds, we have to have bond authority on the books to do that.
Right.
So just because the federal government made this Build America bond program available, we wouldn't have been able to benefit from that at all if the voters hadn't already authorized Proposition 1D, Prop 55, and Prop 47, so on and so forth. So when the Treasurer sold Build America bonds, they were credited against these different GO bonds that the voters had already authorized. We had to use our existing authorization. Does that help, Senator?
A lot. So what you're saying is, in other words, rather than under Prop 55, go out and attempt to sell those bonds, the proceeds from the Build America bond sales, that much, $428.5 million, was simply credited.
Correct. That's exactly correct, Senator.
Does that mean? I'm sorry. I'm just wondering. Does that mean later on? Does that use up part of that bonding authority, or later on can we go out and sell more after that?
No, the state's ability to sell general obligation bonds is directly tied to what the voters have authorized. So without regard to, whether it was 55 or 47 or 1D or whatever the total amount of authority that the voters have given the state to issue, the state can issue up to that amount.
Okay. I guess the only other question I would have is, how are these numbers, how is our share determined? The Treasurer came to the first few meetings, and my understanding was that when that March sale, when those proceeds came in, they would be not only allocated to make up all that borrowing we did from all those other funds, but then there would be money for some of these projects, and indeed there has been. And I suspect, Mr. Shee, you know there is some process where then it's allocated between transportation and all the other places it goes.
Senator Weiland, happy to go over that again. I'm going to apologize in advance if I get one of the details out of order wrong. It's been a couple months since I've been through this. But
and if you'd rather do it separately, I don't want to take people's time. If it's,
what's the pleasure?
I'm happy to do it.
Would you like me to talk about that now, or would you like me to talk with Senator Weiland offline? I'm happy to go either way.
My feelings won't be hurt.
I'm happy to do that.
Let's do that after.
Okay. All right, Senator Weiland, could you have your?
I actually think it's an important question, so I'd be interested in the answer.
548 million.
We got. Okay. I'll give it the 10,000-foot view. We got enough funds into the school facility program to pay off everything out of the approximately $2.4 billion in apportionments that this body had made through the beginning of this year, up through December 17th of 2008, which is when the freeze was put on the pooled money investment, when the Pooled Money Investment Board put a freeze on the Pooled Money Investment Account loan program. This body had $2.4 billion in outstanding apportionments for which no fund releases had been made. Now, in addition to that, there were billions of dollars of other obligations in transportation, in water, in housing, in natural resources, across the board, all the different, there was over 5,000 state public works projects that were in various stages of beginning or completion. And nobody saw the PMIA freeze coming, and therefore there were hundreds of millions of dollars in bills outstanding that were in the pipeline ready to be paid that all of a sudden couldn't be paid because the Pooled Money Investment Board wasn't going to do any more loans, and we were out of the bond markets, had been out of the capital markets for months and months because of two things, because of the state budget crisis and because of the crisis in our financial institutions and partial collapse of the capital markets in the fall of 2008. Okay, so what the Department of Finance did, working with the Pooled Money Investment Board, and the Finance is one of the three members of that board, along with the Treasurer and the Controller, is we came up with a plan on, in priority order, how we would use the funds if the Treasurer was successful in selling bonds in March and April. Now, we know that the Treasurer was successful in selling bonds in March and April. He sold approximately $14 billion in bonds. And again, I apologize if I don't get the figures exactly right, but the first $7 billion of those sales were necessary simply to pay the Pooled Money Investment Account back for loans which it had already made, not only for this program, but for transportation programs and various other aforementioned programs, which meant that there was approximately $7 billion of net proceeds that were on the table to allocate. Then the decision on how to allocate those funds were based upon the following criteria. At the time that the Pooled Money Investment Board put a freeze on PMIA loans, it also came up with a process where it exempted approximately, and I don't know the exact number, it was about 217 is the number that sticks out of my head, projects. And these projects were across the board in every policy area in state government that were exempted from the freeze. And they were exempted for a number of different reasons, but they involved things like health and safety, the extreme cost to the state involving litigation, and other things that would result if we just stopped them in their tracks. And so the first priority was, if we sold bonds, was to go back and pay for the work that had been done on the projects that we exempted. In other words, the people that we said, keep building, we had a commitment to pay them. So that was number one. The second priority on those funds was to go back and pay all of the contractors, all the builders, all the folks that had in good faith been doing public works projects, whether it be trail repair work in San Diego County or road paving up in Tehama County or whatever it was, but who got caught up in the freeze and they weren't able to get reimbursed. And there were large hundreds of millions of dollars of costs associated with bills that were unpaid. So that was the second thing that we had to do. And that wasn't hundreds of millions, it was actually billions. So when we went through all that process, we also came down then to commitments that the state had made for the bond funds, but for which it hadn't released any funds. And this program had a $2.4 billion commitment for which it hadn't released funds. When we went through this process, this sort of accounting process, there was enough money to fund whatever it was, the $2 billion of the 2 point. So we funded everything that we could possibly fund with the money on hand, with the understanding being that sometime in the 9-10 fiscal year, which starts July 1st of 2009, we'd be able to sell at least $400 million more in bonds, which would take care of the full $2.4 billion in apportionments that this body had made. So that was the general process. There's more detail to it than that. I'll spare you the detail. I'd be happy to meet with you or your staff in a separate meeting on it. Does that help?
I appreciate that, and if we could meet separately, I'm just interested in the prioritization. Okay. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Juan, help me. Where are we? I've lost track.
Status of funds.
Can I just make one last comment
yes, Ms. Moore.
on the stimulus? Just from a layperson's perspective, and I think it's important for school districts to know as well, that there are no stimulus funds in this program. That we are not receiving any dollars of stimulus funds. By selling the bonds that we had the authority to sell and that always run this program, the state has a benefit from that because they have a lower debt ratio now to pay back those bonds. So the state has the benefit, if I'm saying that correctly, Tom, I'd like to make sure, of not having as much debt service because the interest rate is zero or little. And the program still gets the amount of money that it always got. And it's generated by the authorization that the voters gave us. So they gave us, $12 billion in authorization. Ultimately, we're going to have $12 billion worth of bond money that comes to this program that we expend out to build schools. Is that? That would probably be something that they would need to answer. I can tell you because we work on the tax side as well. This is all on the tax side of ERA. The Department of Education has got two programs, Qualified Zone Academy Bond Program, and we also have, we're working with the Governor's Office and Department of Finance and others for the Qualified, the School Construction Bond Program. They're all on the tax side of ERA, and the tax side is not as there is not as much accountability as just the direct grant side. So all those districts that receive Title I funding and stabilization, there's a lot of accountability there. On the tax side, it is much less because it is the federal government making up a difference of a tax credit. So I think, that Ms. Chick would be the best person to answer that question, but it probably has put this body and the program into some additional
reporting.
Well, Ms. Moore, I think you're right. I think that I think you're generally right in your assessment of the situation. So I don't argue with that. I would just point out that we wouldn't have got the $2 billion that we got if we didn't sell the Build America
Because
bonds.
we could sell more.
We just wouldn't have got. Bill Lockyer, I think, is the first person that would tell you, if he was here, that had we not been marketing the Build America bonds in April, we wouldn't have had as wide of a market, and we wouldn't have been able to sell tax-exempt school bonds to the tune of billions of dollars at that point. We just wouldn't have been able to do it. So you're right. There are no additional funds in the program, but we were able to sell more bonds at a point in time that was difficult for the state. And, you know, like all the rest of the federal funds that we take, I know Mr. Lowenthal, who's on the conference committee, by the way, nice job, and I'm glad that you came up with a comprehensive proposal to address our budget situation, and we look forward to the process moving forward. But I'm sure that Mr. Lowenthal could comment on the conference committee. They saw a number of proposals where actions that they took would affect our ability to receive federal funds, and so there's strings attached. And so our using these Build America bonds also have some strings attached because we're getting a direct subsidy from the federal government on the interest rates. And I know the Federal General Accounting Office has been all over us on how we're accounting for the ARA funds, and they do consider this part of it. And that's about the extent of my knowledge. I'd be happy to have we can request, why don't we request Laura Schick to come to our next meeting so some of these issues can be addressed directly with her to give this body a better idea what her interest from an accountability standpoint, a bond accountability standpoint is. I think that would be helpful. Senator Weiland.
So just, I think, then, to summarize that part, because of the availability of the Build America bonds, which the Treasurer determined he could sell for all the reasons you cited, Mr. Sheehy, because of that and because of the proceeds, we were then able to attribute to Prop 1D, 155, and 47 proceeds we otherwise, the Treasurer believed, we could not have sold.
It's unlikely that unlikely that we would have been able to. That's
so in other words, we were able to use some of that bonding authority otherwise we wouldn't have done, and we even get a break. So our obligation, I think, if I understand Assemblymember Brownlee's question correctly, is our obligation is simply to repay the Build America bondholders, but since the interest rate is somewhat higher, I think it's something like, I think they're issued like at 7.5% or something, a 30-year bond. Yeah, but we also get a break from the Fed, so it may then bring it back down in line with what it would be with normal.
Right. The net cost to the state would be comparable to our tax exempts.
And then the only other question, which maybe we don't need to take more time here, that I'm interested in is when money comes in, how is our share? I know you described it in general. I'm real curious in a separate meeting how we can get as much as possible.
Okay, Mr. Weiland, and my comment goes to any of the board members that would like to follow up with me or anybody in our Department of Finance on that specific issue, how we're going to deal with this going forward. We'll be more than happy to meet with you individually, with your staff, whatever your pleasure is on that. We're happy to do that. We want to be as transparent as possible. So that's my commitment, and I'm going to stick to it. Okay, so I think we're still on item 5. Is that right, Ms. Silverman?
Correct.
And that's just a report. There's no action required?
No action required.
If there's no objection from the board, we'll move to item 6. Do you have anything more to add on item 6, Ms. Silverman? Have we covered all that?
Yes.
That was also a non-action item, correct?
Correct.
Okay, without objection, then we'll move to our consent special items, starting with tab number 7. And Mr. Morales, can you walk us through the 3 items that are on the consent special today?
The 3 items on the consent special are all facility hardship projects, which means that they have an imminent health and safety. They've demonstrated that they met the qualifying criteria. So beginning with tab 7, we have a project for Susanville. This project had 2 classroom buildings that were reconfigured by the district that resulted in noncompliance with fire code requirements. The fire marshal had closed the school down. We have concurrence from the fire marshal that there is an imminent health and safety issue. This is a conceptual approval for the mitigation, which would cost the state of about $1.9 million. Staff has reviewed the eligibility criteria. They meet the requirements. We recommend an approval. On tab 8, we have another project for CORCORAN Joint Unified. This project had a fire at the multipurpose and kitchen facility. They did receive some proceeds from the insurance. They're requesting to get the difference to pay the total project cost. This project has an estimated total cost to the state of $149,000. This is actually an unfunded approval consideration, as they have the plans approved through CDE and DSA. And finally, on tab 9, we have a project for San Bernardino City Unified. This is a rehabilitation project for another unfunded approval request. The district is doing modernization work and discovered asbestos, so they have an asbestos abatement project qualifying under facility hardship. This would have an estimated cost to the state of about $1.7 million. And again, all three projects have met the criteria to qualify for the facility hardship program, and we recommend that the board approve all of them. So with that, they're all ready for your review, or if you have any questions.
Thank you, Juan. Mr. Harvey.
Well, if I can, I'd like to ask a couple questions on item number 7. I have a policy question and a couple of procedural questions. On the policy side, can you clarify for me, did we participate in any of the funding when the district personnel built non-compliant facilities?
No, it's my understanding that we did not.
That's very good news. This is also very frightening. How does a school district do this?
Actually, I don't know if we have any representatives from the district. That's a question that the district may be better able to answer.
Do we have a representative of the Susanville Elementary School here?
Hello there, Richard Gonzalez from Richard Gonzalez and Associates, and representing Susanville. And no, they did not use any state dollars to do this work. This work was done 30, 40 years ago, and apparently it was, to my understanding, a community activity that occurred to partition the building areas.
Is it possible that it was compliant 40 years ago and now it's not, or was this done without any inspections or permits?
We are unaware of any inspections or improvements or approvals.
Okay. I'm more interested in the process side, although this was awfully tough to read in all candor, and because kids are really at risk here, they're being dispensed in nearby locations that can't utilize the school of their choice. One, I'm trying to understand the public policy reason for a conceptual approval, because it means they've got to come back now and actually apply for these funds. How long ago did they apply for this conceptual approval? And what kind of staff time did it take you to review it? If they had just asked for the money up front, how much sooner could we have gotten the money to them to eradicate this horrible problem?
The district applied approximately in March of 2008, and because these projects are health and safety issues, we work very closely with the district to meet all of the requirements. If there's documents that they don't have, we do request them, we work with them, we do offer some flexibility, because again, these are health and safety issues. Now, I do want to point out that the conceptual approval does require that we do an initial review on the eligibility in terms of a facility hardship criteria. If the board grants a conceptual approval, the district then comes back for a funding application, but we don't reevaluate the merit of the facility hardship. It's just basically a review for a funding application. So there is no double work, if you will. It's basically either it's done at the conceptual part of it, conceptual part of it in the funding, or we do it all at the funding, but there is no double work for these types of projects.
So from a district perspective, the reason you do a conceptual is it gives you certainty that you're going to qualify eligibility-wise.
That's correct. They have certain assurances that this project qualifies and they can move forward and spend the additional time and resources to get the additional plan approval from the Department of Education, the Division of State Architect, and those other agencies.
The downside is that a district keep students dispersed. You have a health problem still standing. And in this case, they applied for this conceptual approval in March of '08. What if they had come in March of '08 and said, we're going to do a funding application for the hardship? Would they have had their money by now?
The requirement is that they would have had to have had the plans approved through the Division of the State Architect and the Department of Education for them to come in for a full funding. So back then, it's our understanding that they did not have the approvals necessary. In fact, I don't think that they still do. That's why they came in and applied on a conceptual basis. Can they move forward with this type of project?
Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time. It just seemed to me that this was perhaps an unnecessary step for a district when there's a health and safety issue involved. You get something conceptually, it takes you over a year to do that. You go back, and although it's a quicker review because you've already established eligibility, you're still having to come back to us again, and there is a gap, a delay, if you will, in correcting a problem. I just was troubled by that, but if it's there's good public policy reason for it, I will end my questions.
I'll move the consent specials.
Okay, we've approved the consent specials. Now, we have a request here. The next one would be Glendale, which we could do now. But we did have a request. Assembly Member Buchanan is here, and she wanted to know if we could take item number 11 out of order. The staff has recommended we approve the seismic item for San Ramon, and she wanted to have an opportunity to address the board. Is there any objection to moving to item 11? Yeah. Seeing none, Juan, can you present item number 11?
Sure. This is our first seismic mitigation program that we have under our current regulations. I do want to point out that there's a great deal of discussion on the program and changes to the program. However, this project met the criteria as it stands today. It is our first project. There is a gym replacement. They had some soil liquefaction problems. They met all of the criteria, so we recommend that the board approve this as a facility hardship under the seismic program.
Great, thank you. Assemblywoman Buchanan.
Yeah, I think that summarizes it really well. I was actually on the school board when we went through all of this, so since it's on for consent, maybe to speed up the day, I know it's been a long day for many of us. If there are any questions, I can answer them, or our Assistant Director of Facilities, Margie Brown, is happy to answer any questions that you have.
No questions, just a hearty thanks. I'm so grateful that we are actually putting dollars to work in this area.
We're very grateful as well, so we request your aye vote on this.
Now, there is one little hitch here, though, Assemblywoman.
Yes.
This falls under the no good deed goes unpunished. The one requirement that the staff forgot to put in the write-up before the funds can be released, Miss Brown's going to have to do some karaoke for us.
Well, better than Miss Brown do karaoke than me, because...
Okay. Assemblywoman, sorry that we had to keep you waiting so long, but we really appreciate you coming for the board. If there's no questions or comments here...
The item.
We have a Mr. Weiland.
I just want to make sure I understand the liquefaction. Does that mean that you discovered that there was a problem with you discovered this seismic?
It was an old gym, and we did a number of different inspections. One was by a soils engineer, and his analysis was that if we had, I forget what magnitude earthquake, but not a really high magnitude, that the soils would be subject to liquefaction, in which case the gym collapses and we have a major problem.
You had some symptoms, you forgot what it
Yes.
was. All right, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion, and we have a second. All in favor? Aye. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your vote.
Okay, now we're going to move on to item number 10, which is Glendale Unified. We've had a lot of discussion on this item. I don't know that we need to go through all that again. I know, Mr. Garrick, you've not been part of those discussions. Staff indicated to me that you might want some additional information. I'm sure your colleagues and our staff would be happy to address it. I think it is fair to say that Assemblywoman Fuller had voted in favor of this when she was here. The chair and Mr. Harvey and Mr. Rard had voted no, but I do think there's enough support to move this item tonight. But That said, what's the pleasure of the board? Okay, we have a motion and a second by Senator Lowenthal. Mr. Garrick.
Staff did brief me yesterday. I've had a chance to review it, and I concurred that we should move the item. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on item number 10, and I'm going to ask for a roll call vote on this, and we're going to leave the roll open for Mr. Harvey to add on.
Mr. Chair, if I can just ask for Mr. Chair, if I can just ask for a clarification. As I understand this item, staff has laid out a number of options. Which one are you voting on?
On the Glendale? I apologize. That's. I think we better decide that before we vote on it.
I would like to amend the motion to support option 3.
Okay, so Ms. Brownlee is moving option 3.
Or amending Senator Hancock's motion, if she would accept that amendment.
Ms. Hancock accepts that?
Yes.
Okay, are we all in agreement? I want to make sure we do the right thing. I want to make sure that the board does the right thing. So we're all in agreement that it is option number 3? Okay. All right, so we have an amended motion by Senator Hancock, a second by Senator Lowenthal. I'm going to wait for Mr. Harvey so he can catch up. Sorry. It's okay. Scott, we are on tab number 10, which is the Glendale Unified item. Senator Hancock has moved the recommendation number 3, which is consistent with the past vote that we had on this. And I asked for a roll call vote. We've had a motion to second. Lisa, can you call the roll?
Mr. Chair, if I can, just for the record, I think there are some legal concerns with option number 3. Those have been stated before. I won't bother the board with repeating them, but there is some concerns there. Thank you.
By way of reference, in our past meeting, we'll note the legal concerns. I think those were fully discussed by this board. They're a matter of public record. I don't think there's any new concerns, and we certainly don't need to rehash that now.
I agree.
Please call the roll.
Okay, Senator Lowenthal? Aye. Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Wyland? Aye. Assemblymember Brownlee? Aye. Assemblymember Torlakson? Aye. Assemblymember Garrick?
Aye.
Scott Harvey?
No.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
And Tom Sheehy?
No. Okay, so that motion passes. Was somebody stand? Okay, so let's move on now to tab number 12, which is the, the next 2 items are technical items, but they're necessary to conform to the emergency regulations we adopted earlier this year. Staff, who's going to present this? Is that Barbara that's going to present this?
Ms. Cameron.
Okay, so we're on tab number 12, which is the school facility inactive preliminary apportionments.
The following item addresses the preliminary apportionments in both the critically overcrowded schools program and the charter school facilities program. And at the January 2009 meeting, the board approved the fiscal crisis emergency regulations that would allow for preliminary apportionments to be considered inactive during the time in which the state is in a fiscal crisis. And on March 25th, the board declared a fiscal crisis, and these regulations were approved by the Office of Administrative Law on April 22nd, 2009. Therefore, now that the regulations are approved and in order to protect the statutory timelines that were provided for the preliminary apportionments, we request that the board make the declaration that the preliminary apportionments on the attachments be considered inactive.
Thank you, Barbara. Questions or comments of board members? This is really, as I understand it, really strictly a technical item which conforms to our action of the adoption of the emergency regs earlier this year.
Move approval.
We have a motion.
I just have a question.
Ms. Moore.
Does it mean that we've captured all projects under these these 2 items, that there won't be any others coming forward, or will you be bringing forward projects over time that get a different 12-month time frame?
I believe we've captured all of the projects with this one item.
Okay, and then I'll be voting affirmatively, but I'll abstain from the Elk Grove School District item, individual item on here.
Okay, so Mr. Harvey, so your motion, okay. So we have a motion by Mr. Harvey. Do we have a second? We have a second by Assemblywoman Brownlee. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, tab 13, Ms. Sharp, are you here? Like the last one, this one is a technical item which conforms to our adoption of the emergency regulations earlier this year. Ms. Sharp.
Yes, this item addresses the emergency regulations that were passed at the February board regarding the joint use and career technical education programs. Basically, these regulations allowed up to a 12-month extension for the current 12-month time period that districts have to complete their approvals through the Department of Education and the Division of the State Architect. As mentioned earlier, the board determined there was a fiscal crisis at the March 25th board meeting. The Office of Administrative Law approved these regulations on April 30th, 2009. So moving these projects in attachment A is one joint use project, and attachment B are the career technical education projects requesting an extension, and staff requests the board to approve these requested
Thank you, Tracy.
extensions.
We have a motion by Assemblywoman Brownlee. We have a second by Ms. Moore. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that item is approved.
Thank you.
Okay, tab 14 is just a non-controversial minor item here. This is the seismic retrofit discussion.
Mr. Sheehy?
Yes, Senator Hancock.
Actually, I'm hoping that we will be able to hold this item over today for another month. I very much appreciate the regulations that are before us today, but a question did arise, and it's a specific example of a school in my district in which the construction type is not included in the regulations. And specifically, this has to do with tile roofs. This is a school with a very heavy tile roof, seismically unsound walls, and very high shaking. But it would not fit under these, and I think it's because nobody actually considered tile roofs on a school. So I discussed this with staff. They were hoping they could come in maybe with some suggested language today, but they weren't able to do so. So if we held it over for another month, both OPSC and the state architect's office could comment. We could have some wording. In addition, we did get an oral opinion, which has been, they sent us a letter affirming the oral opinion from Legislative Counsel that two other items that we discussed could be adopted by board regulation. One was the engineering studies and also the rehousing of students while seismic work is going on. However, I think we're also very interested in making sure that any regulations we adopt would leave us within the $199 million that we have. So I think all of this can be ironed out if we just hold this item over for another month, and I would move that we do that.
Okay. Is there any objection to Senator Hancock's request to give this issue more time to be worked on? Okay, hearing none, would it be the pleasure of the board? I would recommend, if we have the time and the interest, to have some discussion here about some of these issues. The seismic matter is complicated, and there's a lot of moving pieces, and we could put this discussion off to next time, or we could have some discussion now. What's the pleasure of the board, without taking any action today? I'd rather next time. And not a function of that, but more if you're going to ask her to vote on something, then it'd be appropriate to have her present. Yeah, I think okay. So. All right, that's a very good point, Assemblyman Garrick.
Maybe return them.
That's your. Now, if we could just get this type of bipartisanship on the budget, we'd be in really good shape. Kathleen Moore.
May I also add that if we're going to put it over a month, could we also look at the new hall issue and the issue of the date and how many, and whether that would have an impact upon the $199 million? Because I think they testified before us last time. There was some interest in their situation, and if we're going to have another month, let's include that.
I'd like to comment on that. I think that's a good suggestion, and I'd like to. I've had discussion with Mr. Winger from Newhall, and I'll just tell everybody here what I told him, which is I think that what they did was really good. That once they realized they had a problem, they didn't sit around and wait, but he just went ahead and he took care of that problem, and I think that he really should be commended for doing that. I also told him, for what it's worth, that I was inclined to support his request to see if he could get some funds for that as a result of what we've adopted. But what I've also told him all along, and it dovetails with what Senator Hancock said, is that in my view of the world, I think any action that we take on Newhall, since it will have implications to other districts, needs to be considered in the context of the money that we do have on the table, which is the $199 million. And I think in the context of that, then there is an opportunity to see if we can do something for Newhall, perhaps some other districts, but it may come at the expense of some other districts not getting funded. We just have a limited pot of money, and I think that this body is in a position to come up with a good policy direction on how we can spend those funds.
Yeah, so if we could just analyze, what other districts might that include and how much dollar value that may be, then I think that would help our decision-making at the next board meeting.
Juan, have you made enough progress in looking at the Newhall situation so that when you come back to we come back to the board, when OPSC goes back to the board next month, you can give us more detailed information on what other districts may qualify under the process that Newhall is looking at?
Yeah, we should. We've made some progress, but we still don't have conclusive analysis, but we hope to have them by next board.
Yeah, I think it's important for the board to have that. Okay, Mr. Duffy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Tom Duffy for Cash. I appreciate your comment, Senator, about a dangerous project that may not fit the criteria. And I think it would be very helpful if what we wrote and what you would adopt would give some authority for discretion to be used by the state architect as they review these projects. We don't know what's out there. We don't know how many other projects may be like the project that you have in mind. So that would be one thing that I would ask you to take into consideration. The other, or asking your staff to take into consideration as they move to look at this. The other is, I appreciate the movement on the extension of the number of types of buildings as well as that 0.02% change from the 1.7. I would recommend that there be some consideration for greater movement than that, something like on the order of 1.5. We have a limited supply of bond authority. It's not really dollars yet. Limited supply of bond authority. By the discussion that we had last week, and Mr. Sheehy and Mr. Harvey both reacted when I said, well, can we make unfunded approvals above that authority, the 199.5? I think that may be difficult, but if you have authority for a certain amount of money, and you do, why not open this up so that districts can begin to come in? And I appreciate your comments also, Senator, about the engineering study cost and also the interim housing. I think those two things will really cause districts to want to wade into this program, and it's a difficult thing for a school district to do. We've talked about this before, to basically impugn a building, to basically say we can no longer have children in this building. And I think by changing opening the parameters, as I've suggested, and I think as you've suggested, Senator, we would encourage districts to come in. They would feel safer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Smoot.
Good afternoon. Lyle Smoot, representing Los Angeles Unified School District. I want to just kind of bounce off of what Tom said and say we concur with most of those statements. Just a quick briefing on LA's issues and situation. We believe that we have 19 buildings in LA that are of concern under the seismic considerations, if you will. At 1.7, we only have one of those buildings eligible for funding. at 1.5, we still only have one of those buildings eligible for funding. So understanding the whole issue of the amount of money, et cetera, nonetheless, these are buildings that we believe are of concern, and we'd like to see a real serious public discussion about the level of the GSI, the ground shaking intensity level at which to establish the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyle. Mr. Harvey.
I look forward to this discussion because it is so vitally important that we make sure kids are safe. But the haunting issue is if you push the bubble one way on ground intensity, you have to keep it tighter on the building types. If you liberalize that, and you can't go too far on the shake test, because we do have this ceiling. It would be so much easier if we didn't have a ceiling. And the other thing that guides us is the education code section, which requires that we attack the most vulnerable. So therein lies the fun we're going to have, is determining how we want to define vulnerability. Is it going to be heavy tile roofs? Is it going to be ground shake? Is it going to be building type? But I think we're all aware that every time you lean one way, you've got to ratchet down the other. So it's going to be a very fruitful discussion. I was very excited about the set-aside when I first came on this board until I realized that it was a ceiling. I realized that there were impediments, and I realized that there was perhaps liability if we don't do things. So I hope next month we can finish our discussion and get something which is fair and balanced for all.
Any additional comment from board members on this item? Seeing none, we have one more item, and then we will have a closed session with our council.
I did have a quick comment.
Yes,
I'm
Ms.
sorry,
Moore.
Tom, I
Certainly.
didn't get it in there quite away. Here's my concern. We really have identified the buildings. The report continues to say how many there are. It's been ratcheted down from, I think, 77 to 25, and then it could be more. What's of concern to me is if we know the buildings that we would like to fund and we cannot get those people to come forward for that funding, first, I'd like to know why. What is it that is preventing the 25 now known buildings or schools that have the problem of coming forward? What is the problem? And then secondarily, I would be more supportive of Mr. Duffy's open the door wider, may create a little competition, and also provide incentive for others to say, someone else is going to get your money if you don't come forward. But there's something fundamentally flawed here, that we have a program, it's been in place for a long time, we know the district, we know the buildings, and they're not coming forward. So I'd like that addressed as we address this next month.
Okay, very good. I concur with your comments, Ms. Moore. So we're going to move on now to item number 15. And Masha, are you going to present that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. The purpose of this report, which is located behind tab 15, and that is on page 157, is to update the board on the process that we're following for determining the best way to make a recommendation on new construction grant adjustments. And the authority for this comes from Assembly Bill 127. It requires the board to conduct an analysis on the relationship between SFP grants and costs of new construction. And the law allows the board to increase or decrease the new construction grants to cause the grants to correspond to costs of construction. For this analysis to be conducted, it is necessary to collect actual cost and project information from school districts. This information is not available at the time of funding. We have begun collecting information on new construction projects in July of last year. We're using an online data gathering tool. It's basically a questionnaire. It was developed from the survey template that was first designed by the Grant Adequacy Ad Hoc Committee that was pulled together a couple years ago to address the high bid climate situation in the state. There were also subsequent discussions at the SAB Implementation Committee about the tool. We capture information on costs. We asked about project scope, and we also asked questions and asked districts to report any changes to the projects that were made after funding when districts maybe had to go downgrade materials or eliminate certain project elements due to bids and high costs. As of the end of March, which is what we're using for our cutoff date for this year's study, we have received information on about 600 projects. We will not be able to use all of this information due to errors and some of the inapplicable items. However, even after making exclusions, we believe that we will have an adequate data sample to make some conclusions on the issue and present to the board. And more importantly, we now have actual project information gathering process reported from the field. And as far as we know, this data in this format is not available through any other source. Because districts report information at 3 different stages in the project, during the life of the project, there's data available that spans at least the last 3 years or so. We still have a challenge, and we will have a challenge in making prospective decisions on grant amounts using historical data, but having that historical data really gives us a powerful tool in analyzing the trend. In other words, if the historical data consistently shows inadequacy of grants, the board will have that information to make decisions on adjustments. And in an attempt to develop an approach to this analysis, we have initiated discussions at 3 implementation committee meetings. We have been hesitant to review the data before we develop the approach because we did not want a situation in which a desired outcome from either side of the argument drives the methodology. A lot of discussions at the implementation committee meetings focused on criticisms on the actual reporting process. There are questions about the accuracy of data, especially with projects that are reporting estimated project costs. There were other stakeholders that urged us to discard the entire data collection effort and start all over, exchange it for another approach. We do recognize that the reporting process is new to everybody, including districts and OPSC staff. We have questions that come up often. We have refined the process. We have refined the instructions that are provided. We are initializing a triage process to address any questions on the reporting that come up right when the reporting is done, not several months later. We do plan on additional outreach, such as workshops, hands-on workshops on this, and we're also looking at a process to consider potential changes to the data gathering to streamline the process. We would like to proceed with the data analysis as we have outlined for the implementation committee. We have already begun the work in this direction, and this would represent the fastest approach to making a recommendation to the board. Developing a completely different process would delay us further, and we did hear concerns from stakeholders that we're already in the middle of the calendar year and we have not yet made a recommendation. I think there was an expectation that recommendation on these adjustments would be done either concurrently or shortly after we do our normal adjustment for inflation. We are looking to develop a methodology, and we're taking the time to develop this methodology this year to hopefully expedite this process next year and thereafter. And we're also recognizing the fact that the impact of the delay is somewhat mitigated by the fact that no actual apportionments have been made, so there's less of a direct impact on projects. We're prepared to proceed with analysis. We want to use as the basis the steps that we outlined for the IMP committee. I can go through the methodology in more detail for you tonight if you'd like to.
Ms. Letzek, I don't think we should
That's why I'm offering that as an option.
No, but let me just say the reason why I'm saying that is because I know that there's still not a strong enough consensus on the approach. I don't think this body tonight is my sense is this body tonight's not going to be ready to approve that approach because it's not fully cooked. Otherwise, I'd say if we were ready to move on, I'd say let's do that. So did you have some additional comments? Okay, so I think Mr. Duffy wanted to come address us on this issue.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members. Tom Duffy for Cash. I appreciate the work that has been done, and there has been dialogue on what should be in and what should be out. In the early part of this decade, we, the Cash organization, looked at grant adequacy and compared the grants to the old program. And we took a good deal of time to do that. We shared that information with the State Allocation Board in 2005 and asked that the board not just take our information, but take the methodology we used give it to OPSC, and ask them to do their own review. That was done. The executive officer at the time convened a group that included practitioners as well as people within the Office of Public School Construction and others, and there was a good deal of dialogue on what should be in and what should be out and how the data should be looked at. If that kind of work could be done again with this question, we would very much appreciate that. One thing that we did with our study, and we've suggested it with this study, our study that was concluded in 2005, we determined that we wouldn't look at additions, this is an example, we wouldn't look at additions of buildings because that wouldn't give you a clear picture. We had to look at complete projects where there was a site acquisition and where there was site development and the like. So we basically sorted data out to look at projects, and that one example. We've suggested that. We've also suggested that only data for projects that have been completed, and so we know what the final tally is, should be included, not the estimates that are being received along the way. So just two examples there, but what we'd ask is ask your staff to work with us so that we could dialogue with them. I don't know if this is going back to the implementation committee, but if we'd be pleased to work with them, share our thoughts, and be able to report that back to you, because there is data here. We've been critical of some of the data, but we have actually, through the good people in the Office of Public School Construction, we asked for the information, and we have a stack of documents about that high. We've reviewed it, and we have come to a conclusion. We sorted differently than they're proposing. We'd love to share that with them. But our conclusion supports the 6%. In fact, goes beyond that. But if you could direct your staff to do that, we'd appreciate it very much, and everybody would see what's happening.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
Thank you.
I would encourage you to then continue to work with OPSC, and we'll going to have this item come back to us in July, and hopefully by then we'll have greater consensus around the methodology for AP 127.
Thank you for that, and I'll be in contact with Mr. Morales. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so Senator, I'm sorry. Ms. Rombach. Senator Weiland.
Senator Weiland, no.
Ms. Rombach.
Thank you. Susan Rombach, Interim Assistant Executive Officer for the Board. The June 5th Implementation Committee was my first implementation committee, by the way. And some of the things that had come up regarding this, and my understanding is that some of the same issues kept coming up, and this was June 5th was the third meeting that this was addressed. But to me, the issue that kept going around and around, the methodology was addressed, but there seemed to be a lot of the conversation around the collection tool itself, which is called a project information worksheet. And if we can, one of the reasons that I had asked that this come to the board as an information meeting is I wasn't convinced that we were going to come to any kind of resolution at the implementation committee if we didn't get past the tool, the data collection tool. And we were hoping that we'd get some direction from the board regarding that tool, because it was adopted by the board previous to this one. But my understanding is that there was a year-long process of back and forth about what should be in the
project information worksheet.
I'm going to stick with the acronym. So that was just one of my comments, and so I suspect that I don't know if anyone's going to suggest to go back to the board.
Do you have a recommendation on the best way to tee this up for the board to weigh in on the PIW?
I don't.
That wasn't meant to be a trick question. I mean, I'm at a loss. Yes, Senator Lowenthal.
I'm just learning about this myself. I'm wondering, do we ever have, if it's the problem or the issue is the actual tool itself, the PIW, do we ever get consultation or outside input from experts out there on what would how we could improve that instrument?
Well, I wasn't here, so I wasn't involved, but I understand there was quite a bit of discussion and deliberation on what was to go into it.
Senator Weiland.
There's talk about stakeholders, and I guess those are the people who attend these meetings. Who are they? Who attends the meetings? Who are the stakeholders? I guess we have Tom Duffy from CASH and the SAB. Who are there?
I can't specifically identify everyone there. It's an open meeting, and everyone, any person in the public can attend. There's representatives from districts and the building community, and also, as I said, school districts and organizations such as CASH.
My thought is, and I haven't seen this, I would like to see it, is that I think experienced builders can cut through this pretty quickly. But we have a process where, just by its very nature, there's nothing we can do about it. It's more awkward because we have a board and we have to go through it. But, and I'm not sure quite the best way to do that. You wouldn't want to have someone who had a vested interest, but I think there might be a couple of consultants out there who do not have any vested interest in any. And I'll tell you, it is not, once you get those people, it's not that hard.
Senator Weiland, if those consultants came back with a recommendation to make the grant adjustment a negative number, would you still be willing to support that?
If they
that could be where we ended up if we went down that road.
How so?
Well, just based upon the economy. I'm hearing a lot of anecdotal information right now from a lot of different types of construction, including schools, that bids are way down.
Oh, absolutely they are.
I mean, if we go down the road of the independent don't have a dog in this fight, they can come back with a recommendation that's a negative number, and I don't know, just realistically, I don't know how this board might feel about that. Well, the ceiling is 6% on the grant adjustment pursuant to AB 127, if I got it right. But there's nothing that says it couldn't come back at a -1 or a -2 or -3. We already heard Mr. Duffy comment he thinks it should be higher than 6%. I think 6% is the ceiling. I'm just saying if we go down that route, you could end up with a result that wasn't real popular.
I think there are factors that clearly change over time. Cost of material, I mean, we all know what's happening in the economy and all the factors that go into cost. It just seems to me, aside from the legislation, we ought to have an idea. And I don't know quite how we would adjust for this, but we ought to have an idea what it costs at a given period of time and space to build a school, because there's wide variation. So, and I may be posing a separate question from this one, but I can look at the same period, at the same area, the same geographic area, similar schools, and you can find an enormous variation of what it costs to build a school.
Yeah.
And that affects how much money we're giving out. And that's sort of the question I'm asking, which maybe is in some ways almost unrelated.
Well, that's an important question. Assemblyman Garrick.
I heard a comment earlier from the young lady that was presenting, and she mentioned an inflation factor. And is that we're discussing the 6% portion?
The 6% is authorized in law in addition to the inflation adjustment that the board does every year.
6% plus an inflation adjustment. Do you have a?
Mr. Garrick, the 6% that Marsha is referring to, this board already granted a 6% increase to the per pupil grant based upon inflation, and it was a positive number. And at the time, I made the comment that we were using data that was lagged. That didn't reflect the current construction index, but I said that there have been other times when the lag had gone the other way, and so we went along with the full 6%, which I think was a pretty good adjustment given our current economic circumstances. This AB 127 adjustment is on top of the 6% increase we've already granted. I'm sorry.
And thank you for clarifying. And that concerns me, and I'm going to just draw the parallel with the Transportation Committee that I sit on, and Caltrans, Mr. Will Kempton, who is departing shortly, but has shared that instead of getting 2 to 3 bidders, he's getting 5 to 7 bidders on projects, and the price is down between 18 and 22% on road construction projects. And I would hope that this formula have some flexibility to work both ways and not just up, so that we could, as citizens and taxpayers and this board, take advantage of the market and get more bang for our buck in a simple term.
Senator Weiland?
Yeah, I think what Assemblyman Garrett is saying is sort of pointing to, and Mr. Shi, you also essentially addressed the issue. Things are going to change, and what we want to do is, as fairly as possible, fund and as adequately as possible fund those schools, and that may change. Right now, we have the possibility, and I don't know how that would conform with our rules and the law there, of saving money, which later on, when it turns around, we could use to fund more schools. So I'm not sure quite how we deal with this, and I would like to see what those criteria are that are being used now and being developed. But if we could somehow figure out a way to do that, it would, I think, be a wise use of funds. I'm not quite sure yet how to do it.
Well, as I understand it, I just have a comment then, Ms. Moore, I believe. But one, the project information worksheet, that's a tool that was developed by a previous board. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I know there's probably, there are probably lots of, since it took a whole year to do, there was probably lots of people on all sides of those issues, and they went round and round and round. Mm-hmm. And I understand that this is a new board. There are a few holdovers, but it just seems to me that we set ourselves up for a lot of additional debate and discussion if we have to redo everything. I would think if the State Allocation Board, which was still made up of the same number of appointees from the same authorities, approved that project information worksheet, I don't know why we have to re-debate that endlessly, but if that's the will of this body, we could do that. But we do need to have some sort of methodology. Mr. Duffy has offered to continue working with OPSC. I think if you can help, Tom, that'd be great. But I also think that, at the end of the day, we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, since I'm sure Senator Simidian and Senator Margette and the other senators and assembly members that were on this board, along with my predecessor Ann Sheehan and Ms. Moore, I'm sure I know they spent many hours working on this issue, and we should be in a position to take advantage of some of that work. I think Ms. Moore had a comment.
Just 3 quick points. Having been in this a long time, one of the problems that we encounter is the very thing that you're talking about, Senator Weiland, and that is we are doing an analysis on a square footage basis, yet we fund on a per pupil basis. We used to have a program that was based on square footage. We paid for square footage. You came in with 250,000 square foot high school. By category, we gave you money for that particular high school. We moved off of that 10 years ago and said, we're going to give you per ADA amount. You expend it. Here's the state share. If it's good, great. If it's not, you have to make up the difference. We heard from districts. I experienced it in a district. We made up a lot of difference. And that was during the up years. We're probably in some of the down years now, and there may be some capturing, but I would propose that I think we're behind in that scenario. So I hope my legislative colleagues, when we look at another bond measure, maybe a per ADA amount is not the best way to go, because the rest of the building world works on a square footage basis. So that's one thing, but it's in law. That's what we have to deal with. But maybe we ought to be looking at that, because I continue to hear people trying to shoehorn the per ADA into square footage. It's really tough to do. My second point is, from the Department of Education's vantage point, we want to ensure that we are building not only quality material, which I know a lot of people, and quality buildings, we want to ensure that they're educationally appropriate and adequate. We're concerned about what's been removed. And is that being captured? You know, did somebody remove the gym because they didn't have enough money to do it, and yet it looks like, okay, the amount of money we gave them built a square footage, and it got a square footage dollar amount. That's what we're interested in. We're interested in complete schools. And I firmly believe that additions skew the numbers. The per ADA amount was established based on building complete schools, building an entire school. It wasn't established on additions, and that's a whole probably another conversation that we'll have to go to. So we're interested in those pieces. I hope that the project information worksheet or the analysis that's done with the 600 projects that we have, I hope they're complete schools, and that we can look at the information in that manner. We tried an outside source. It didn't work very well, and nobody wants to dredge that up again. But it didn't work very well either. But I think part of the issue of that was methodology. So I'm going to be very interested in that final methodology, what you're talking about, and what that is. How are we going to look at the data, and what are we throwing out, and what are we keeping in, and why?
Before we go, I have Mr. Harvey, then Senator Lowenthal, but I want to, Kathleen, follow up. This is not meant to put you on the spot at all, but I mean, is there any comment that you can make about the work that the last configuration of the board did on this project information worksheet?
I'd be happy to. It was not easy, and I think ultimately this is how I saw it come down. There was a lot of discussion in the IMP committee. I believe firmly that districts were opposed to a project information worksheet. And the reason they were opposed to it, it was yet another piece of information that isn't actually directly linked to this program. So for instance, if we funded on a square footage basis and districts reported that, they'd have to report it to get their money. This is another piece of information somewhat at the back end now, because we've had 10 years of projects that didn't have this. And I felt that school districts, we never quite came to conclusion on it from the school district point of view. From the department's point of view, we were concerned about elements being lost. And I do think there was an attempt to address that in the project information worksheet by calling out specific areas and whether they got built or not. So I do think they tried to do that. Ultimately, what the board did, it did approve the project information worksheet, and it was after it went to the implementation about 3 times, and it was over the objection of school districts. That was pretty much my recollection of what went on. I don't think anyone in the room, staff, the districts, anybody felt we did a great job of it. We kind of said, let's get through this. And it also was in the time that we'd just gone through a pretty awful situation with the outside report. So, does that help?
No, thanks, Kathleen. That's great. I have Mr. Harvey. I have Mr. Harvey, then Mr. Lowenthal.
The fact of the matter is that AB 127 requires us to make a grant adjustment. So we've got to do something to figure out whether we do that or not. And if I'm reading this initial information report correctly, staff is suggesting we either do the kind of data that is in the sheet now, or we use something called McGraw-Hill. And they're coming down on the side of what we're doing now because it's more comprehensive. So to me, the key question is, what is the information? Is this data that we collect all that superior? And I think we're going to have a recommendation from you all on that question, McGraw-Hill or something else. And the other issue, I think, is the one that Ms. Rombach pointed out to. The last paragraph on page 158 says it's not only the data, it's the collection process. So it seems to me the other issue that we need to have before us, and there will be debate, I'm sure, is what is that process? Is this data sheet what we should use or something else? So to me, that's how I would bifurcate what you bring back to us.
Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, I don't want to complicate it because I was not here before. A little information is a dangerous thing. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I'm a legislator that never stops me. I was just struck with, and I got a copy of going through the staff comments, and they were talking about, there was a suggestion to use one of the recent UC Berkeley studies. The Berkeley study did not make a recommendation, but it did argue for the state to collect data, I think, on school construction costs as without this data, an accurate study. And they go through, and I just then got the copy of the study, just understand, because we have these wonderful resources in the state, public resources, and that was the complex and multifaceted nature of school construction costs, factors that affecting California. I just want to, I'm not saying it'd be nice to have them understand what we're doing, just to ask them this method, because they're talking about the methodology, and they actually wrote a report on school construction costs in California, UC California, the Center for cities and schools at UC Berkeley. I just don't know why we just don't in some way access them. That's all I'm saying. It may or may not be appropriate. I don't know.
On that point, I mean, I think that why not invite them to come address the board? Juan, can you please follow up with Senator Lowenthal's office and see if we can make that happen? Assemblywoman Brownlee.
Well, I'm also probably a dangerous legislator that knows very little and could, cause a lot of trouble here. And I can imagine how complex this is. I mean, just hearing the comments so far, regional costs, that's clearly an issue. You build a gymnasium for a high school, it could be a much more expensive gymnasium. Elementary schools don't really need gymnasiums, or typically don't have them. But compared to a middle school gymnasium, I mean, it's, I can't imagine why people ended up going back to a per pupil cost, because it could get so complex. But, going back to what Senator Lowenthal said about going back into the study and being able to ask the questions, I mean, we're not the only agency in town that's had to wrestle with this kind of question. I mean, there are other government agencies building things. I mean, I don't know whether there are other methodologies that other agencies have used that we could at least compare and contrast and see, what other methodologies are out there and what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks, et cetera. But I can see that it will be an interesting discussion.
I really appreciate Mr. Shih, your comment about the hours that were spent on that, and try to redo that. And I'll just make one comment really off Assemblywoman Brownlee's comment. And I'm not quite sure today how we would get there, and maybe this is the best way. But all I can tell you is, and it's the same with a house, you can build a certain size facility that has the same utility for dramatically different cost. And with a house, it's the owner's choice. You can build a house for this much or that much, the other thing, or what the owner can afford. But in this instance, we've got not the district, but we've got the money we want to spend, and I can see why they might have just given up and or thrown their hands up, not given up, but thrown their hands up and said, let's just go to a per pupil basis. But I do think we ought to address that, because if we can determine that a district can build an adequate school for a certain amount, and we then give what we think is a fair amount for that, and that happens to be less in some instances than it's been, but we think it's fair, that gives us more money for more districts and more schools. And it's complicated, but I hope that through this process somehow we can get there.
What might also be instructive is we, at the last onset of this issue, the Department of Education was asked to kind of weigh in on, okay, what should we be building? We have not added per square foot for students in the state of California. And in fact, it also it showed our ranking nationwide. And it actually showed that California is building pretty efficient schools because, well, I don't know if the word efficient is correct. We're building less per student than most states in the nation. So I'd be happy to share that with you, because I think it does bring context to the discussion that's going on here. Education has changed a lot since the 1940s, and have we kept pace with that in terms of what we build? So that's what complicates us in that, a square footage of a house is a choice, but part of education, how our programs are delivered, complicates, the square footage number, so to speak.
Mr. Rowland, can we go to Mr. Garrett first? Mr. Garrett.
Could I ask Ms. Moore for a little clarification on what she was referring to in terms of California building less per student than other states? Are you talking about on a per square foot basis?
On a per square foot basis, California. Fred, do you remember? I mean, we rank about 47th. I want to say it's pretty low per square foot. And what we did also is we took 100 current projects that were going on right throughout the state, and we looked at what they were in comparison regionally and nationally to what goes on. So when the program was established and moved from a square footage program to a per ADA amount, the shift was, what was hoped to happen was to equate that square footage to a per student amount, and hopefully then that would work forward. And I'm not so sure that it did. Fred, do you remember from our report? Fred Yeager was the author of it.
I'm sorry, sir. I apologize. Could you please identify yourself?
Fred Yeager of the Department of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager.
The complete school report was presented to the board on May 23, 2007. And one of the things it did look at was the median square footage per student in 11 regions throughout the country. It was School Construction News report, I believe, has an annual evaluation of school costs and size throughout the country. And California was grouped with Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, I believe. And that region does provide the lowest per square footage nationally. Now, taking that, we could also analyze the 60 complete schools in there were lower than that regional amount. So we were the lowest in the lowest region.
And you could imagine the region that we were in, does take into the fact that those states have enjoyed better weather, and so there is some issues about square footage and what you need to provide students in the east versus sometimes what you need to provide them in the west. But even given that, we were very austere in our square footage per students that we have funded throughout our history. And I'd be happy to share that report as well. And what I know the Office of Public School Construction in collaboration with us, they were looking at, to us, which I think is appropriate, what is a complete school? What do the educators say we should be building? And that report was an attempt to look at historically what's happened here and, maybe where we need to go in the future.
The study...
I'm sorry, Mr. Gray. Go ahead.
The study that you were just explaining and that you referenced earlier seems to be based on what the industry standard in construction is, and that's on a per square foot basis. Right. And it seems like that should be the rule. It seems to work very well in the free market. Speaking as someone who personally has built hundreds of apartment units, built office buildings, built retail, and owns them and manages them today, I don't know any other way but per square foot basis for all of those purposes in the end, as far as what you want as an end result, whether it's a strip center, as they're commonly called, a neighborhood center, or a shopping center, a regional center, or an office building that you are going to house people in on a day-to-day 40-hour week, or residents, be it apartments or single-family homes. The sheet that was supplied to me, which I find helpful and interesting, the project information worksheet, breaks it down like every project I've ever worked on, where it comes out on a per square foot basis, and any other formula than that, just, and I'll use a term loosely, throwing money at a project on a per kid basis or per child basis doesn't seem like it's an appropriate formula at all, particularly when you're dealing with the free market to build the school for you, and you are going to want to get the most you can for your dollar. when some of the prices that I looked at these, I was absolutely shocked at the price per square foot. Now, granted, you have a blend of different types of equipment, or excuse me, of facilities here, but when you've got classrooms, those are generally just square rooms. Having a wife who is a third grade teacher, I've visited quite a few schools that she's taught at, multi-purpose room, cafeterias, libraries, administrative support facilities, restroom buildings, things like that. But when they're coming out in at $395 to $401 per square foot on this little two-page sheet that seems to give you a nice summary, one of my wealthier neighborhoods in Rancho Santa Fe that I believe Mr. Scott is familiar with, Scott Harvey.
There, but I'm familiar with it.
Homes with marble floors and wolf ranges and the top line of every single item you can have are coming in at $350 a foot, less than these schools are coming in at. It's just, I'm absolutely surprised.
I have Mr. Weiland next, then Ms. Moore, but I would like to just remind the board, just so you know, we do need to go into closed session to receive information from our council. So I want to make sure we don't lose our quorum. I don't want to truncate the debate here. I just want to be mindful of the time. Mr. Weiland.
I appreciate that, and it's tough to discuss this in a forum like this. This shows how hard it is to make government work sometimes, but we have to make it work. I guess what I think between both what we've heard here and here, my intent, and I don't think Assemblyman Garrett's intent, is in any way to short the educational facility at all. No. I mean, that facility must be adequate. I think both of us absolutely agree about that the facility absolutely must be adequate. I think what Assemblyman Garrett is saying and I'm saying is that something can be very adequate, very utilitarian, even more utilitarian, and have a wide cost difference. And somehow, I think it behooves us to try to deal with that. But not with the intent, oh, gee, we're just going to, give them a substandard facility in any way. I'll just give you one example. I was on a board of a district that was not a wealthy district particularly. We had to save money. And we had to build a couple of schools. And we found a system, I won't go into it in terms of construction, but we found a system that you could replicate. And we visited award-winning schools, design schools, in another neighboring district, very well-known district, and talked to the staff there, looked at the facility, and then you looked at couple of these other schools, which wouldn't have won those design awards, but when you talk to staff, they loved it, much more so than the awarded facility, simply because it had been designed over time to work. It worked for faculty, it worked for students, sinks are in the right places in elementary schools, all those things. So, without talking this to death, all I'm saying is somehow, and I don't know how, but we're obviously working at it, I think we need to address that question so we save as much money as possible to build as many schools for kids as possible.
Okay, was there an additional comment, Kathleen? Or we're going to come back to this item in July. We have one more. We have the full board here, and we have still a lot of our public participants. I would like to recognize Mr. Nanjo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real briefly, I think most of the board members have had a chance to meet the new incoming counsel for this board, Teresa Boron. I wanted to take this opportunity and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair, just to briefly thank the board members for the opportunity of working with you all. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with a board that has the kind of conscientious desire and passionate interest in the subject matter that this board does. I know it's been rather challenging and we haven't always seen exactly eye to eye, but there is a great deal of respect on my part for the board members and the dedication that all of you show to this. Providing schools and educations to our kids is probably one of the most important task that a society has, and I recognize that, and that's very evident in the work that all of you do, your staff does. It's also my opportunity to recognize the OPSC staff. I know a lot of the new board members haven't had a chance to meet them all, but you have a unusually dedicated group of individuals who really do care about the program. Again, I'm sure that there are situations where the board members haven't always seen eye to eye with staff, but I will verify for both sides that both of your hearts are in the right place and you're trying to work toward the benefit of education as a whole and school kids specifically. So it has been, again, a very great honor and pleasure for me to work with both the board and the OPSC staff, who has been very hardworking, dedicated. I work usually pretty late hours, and I'm always surprised when I get a call on my office phone from OPSC staff members who are also at their office working very hard, and that happens a great deal. I imagine, again, this is due to the importance that everyone recognizes to the work, importance that everyone identifies with the work that we do. So, again, thank you. Due to some work assignments and some shifting in my office, I've been asked to take a more larger role in my office as a whole, which prevents me from working with this staff. So if I can recognize Teresa.
Teresa, could you please come forward?
Teresa Boron-Irwin is a senior staff counsel at our office, and she has been given the task to work with this board. I will be available to assist as necessary, but she'll be taking the board starting next month and working with OPSC staff. So again, from myself, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Henry, thank you very much for your comments. I think that we all take that to heart, and I really appreciate that. Okay, any other public comments before we go into closed session? We're not going backwards, are we, Lyle? We're going forwards. Mr. Smoot.
Thank you. Once again, Lyle Smoot for Los Angeles Unified. I'll make this real easy. I agree with what Ms. Moore said about the contentiousness of the PIW. It will be a contentious document, but rather than go backwards, I'd just like to say that a good part of the problem with not being able to get this through the implementation committee is the lack of ability to see the data coming out of the contentious worksheet. If you could just direct staff, at least from my perspective, between now and the next time we discuss this, to take that data, that analysis, however they want to do it. I'm not saying let us change it or anything, just take the data and the analysis to the implementation committee, maybe, as Tom Duffy said, through a subset of some sort, but let us see that data so we don't have another Macias report problem.
Okay, Juan, could you please work with LA Unified to see if there's anything we can do about making the data more transparent to address some of his concerns? Okay, great. Thank you, Lyle. Any further comment? Seeing none, we are going to go into closed session, which means that we need to ask you all to leave. And for those of you that are wondering, we don't have any more open session business to do. So while you're welcome to stay around, for us to adjourn, you can, but there's no need to unless you're just dying to. We will take a 5-minute recess before we start our closed session.